Arts have been my calling for as long as I can remember. I first discovered this obsession as a child, watching my mother create a watercolor painting on our kitchen island. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating her paper, and I sat in awe as each stroke and dab of paint brought a stunning blue jay to life. It was so realistic that I could have sworn if I listened closely, I might hear it chirping from its perch on a delicate branch. After watching for a while, I knew I wanted to do what she did. Carefully, I approached her, my best manners in place, and asked if I could have my own paint and paper to use alongside her. She smiled softly and agreed, and we spent the afternoon painting together. I was ecstatic. Frantically, I dipped my brush into the water, then into the paint, and unleashed my creativity onto the paper. My skill was nowhere near my mother's, but I was proud of the little flower-filled landscape I had managed to create. Grabbing another sheet, I let the water flow freely from my brush, but even that wasn't enough of an outlet for my excitement. When my mother got up to use the bathroom, I acted without thinking. I shoved my fingers into the palette. My index finger glowed bright green, my thumb deep blue, and the rest in a riot of color. Then I turned my attention to the largest canvas I could find, the kitchen walls. Without hesitation, I pressed my hands against the drywall, transforming its plain cream color into a swirling masterpiece. My hands smeared paint across the surface, vibrant streaks trailing in their wake. My mother returned moments later, far less pleased than I was. She handed me a washcloth and demanded that I clean up my incomplete masterpiece. I obliged. It took far longer to wipe away the mess than it had to create it. To this day, it remains a cherished memory, one my mother and I both held dear. Or, at least we did. She died a month ago from lung cancer. The cigarettes she once loved had finally done her in. I was her only child, and with no father in the picture, it fell solely on me to organize the funeral while balancing work and college. The whole situation was painful, to say the least. The one person who had supported me through everything was gone. Seeing her lying in that casket was the rawest emotion I had ever felt. When I returned home from the service, I knew I couldn't handle it much longer. I needed a break. From work, from school, from everything. So I emailed my professors, spoke with my managers, and told them I wouldn't be coming in for at least a week. They were all understanding, told me to take my time. Throughout the day, my fingers would instinctively hover over my phone, lingering over my mother's number, only to remember there was no one left to pick up. I missed our casual calls, the way she'd excitedly share the success of her latest exhibition, or offer thoughtful insight on my newest piece. Those conversations had once been the highlight of my day. Now, the very moments that once brought me joy had turned into painful reminders of what was lost. I tried to ignore the gnawing anxiety, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling until the texture seemed to shift and ripple before my eyes. When that failed, I reached for an unread book from my shelf, only to find myself stuck on the first page, rereading the same lines without absorbing a word. Nothing could dull the pain, the rage, or the sadness pressing against my chest. In the end, I did the only thing I could. I painted. With no plan, no direction, I set up my easel in the middle of my bedroom, dabbed acrylics onto my paint-stained palette, and let my hands take over. Every ounce of emotion that had built up inside me poured into the brush. I crushed it against the taut canvas over and over, splattering blacks and reds without remorse. The only sounds in my room were my labored breaths and choked sobs, dripping onto the canvas, pulling colors away as they fell. As I continued, it almost felt as if another hand gripped the brush alongside mine, steady, deliberate. It was trying to stop me. I resisted. I just kept painting and painting. And painting, until my arms started to ache, and even that didn't stop me. I continued throwing colors onto the canvas, layering them again and again until a rich, varied texture emerged. By now, I wasn't painting with the skills I had honed. Through countless hours of practice, I was painting with pure animalistic instinct. My heart beat with the brushstrokes, allowing each pump of blood to carry my body forward. When it was finally done, I collapsed to the floor, sobbing. The stillness of the night pressed in through my window, In front of me stood my completed work, a theater mask, eyes hollow and empty, red tears welling at the corners like an emotion too heavy to contain. Its mouth was parted in a silent wail, the kind that never reaches anyone's ears. Its teeth uneven and yellowed, barely visible behind trembling lips, the kind that quivered just before breaking into sobs. Containing the mask was a vacant black void. It sat in solitude within the vastness of space. It was perfect. It was exactly how I felt, my grief made material. Satisfied with my work, I lay on my back and stared at the mask in quiet melancholy. I imagined it staring back, not at my outer shell but into the deepest parts of my soul. It knew me. We shared the same anger, fear, and pain. Everything. That small shred of understanding was enough to make me feel just a little closer to being okay. Lying there with nothing left to distract me, memories slipped into view, so vivid that my body felt them as they passed through me. I stood in our garden, the cool grass and loose soil comforting beneath my feet. Nearby, my mom watched over me, clad in worn yard gloves and old jeans as I carefully pruned the plants with the clippers. I was careful to cut only the dead or fruitless branches so all the energy could go to the small green tomatoes that had just started to appear. I was ecstatic to be of help, and when I couldn't reach the higher branches, she came over and lifted me up. We made the perfect team. The funny thing was, I had never liked tomatoes, but I thought maybe I'd like one now. The memory wrapped around me like a warm blanket, a fleeting comfort against the chill of reality. I held on to it, just long enough to let my eyes close and my mind drift into sleep. When I awoke, my back ached from sleeping on the hard floor. I rubbed the tiredness from my eyes and pushed myself upright, groggy and disoriented. The air in my apartment was unbearably cold, sharp enough that each breath left condensation in the air, but it wasn't just the cold. It felt heavy, pressing into my lungs like a weight. A creeping unease settled in my chest. Had I left a window open? Forgotten to turn on the heater? Wrapping my arms around myself, I rubbed warmth into my skin and turned to look at the painting. It sat exactly where I had left it, completely unchanged, which was strange. The paint wasn't supposed to still be wet. Acrylics usually dried within an hour, sometimes faster in the right conditions. But when I ran my finger along the black edge of the canvas, my fingertip left a long smudge. I told myself it was just the cold, maybe the humidity, but a gnawing feeling in my gut wasn't convinced. I had painted in this room for years, through every season. I knew how long acrylics took to dry, yet without any logical explanation. I forced the unease down and went about my morning. Using what little energy I had, I tried to take care of myself, washed my face, watered my plants, took my meds, and made a half-hearted attempt at breakfast. My cereal went soggy as I mindlessly stirred it, my appetite non-existent. Then, without warning, tears spilled down my face, slipping and mixing into the leftover milk. I hadn't realized I was crying. I gave up. Pushing my untouched breakfast aside, I returned to my bedroom, planning to rest. But the moment I stepped through the doorway, I froze. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But as I moved closer, a shiver crawled up my spine. The mask's tears had changed. They weren't small streaks anymore. They were pouring. Thick red lines streamed down its face, so dark they almost looked wet. The mask had been weeping alongside me while I was gone. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. My first instinct was to blame exhaustion, grief, my mind playing tricks on me. But the tears looked different, not just longer but thicker, glistening in the dim morning light. I took a cautious step closer. My fingers trembled as I reached out, barely brushing the surface. It was wet. A warm red wetness clung to my fingers. It wasn't paint but something viscous and thick. It made no logical sense, it wasn't possible. Yet the smell of iron lingered in the air. My breath hitched. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. No, this wasn't possible. Acrylic paint didn't do this. It didn't change overnight, it didn't stay wet for hours, and it didn't smell like this. I tried to steady my breathing, to reason with myself. Maybe my exhaustion had made everything seem more real than it was. Maybe. Drip. I jumped in my skin and snapped my gaze back. A single red streak slid down the mask's face, swelling at the edge. It clung there, one heartbeat, then another, and then it fell, landing with a soft, wet pat against the carpet, deepening the stain I hadn't noticed until now. I stood, frozen, breath shallow, watching in disbelief. The red continued to seep into the fibers of the rug. But after a minute, the drops stopped. The painting sat still once again. I must have been going insane. Nothing that I saw could have happened. Suddenly, a shot of adrenaline jolted through me. I grabbed the painting and rushed out of the room, setting it face down against the trash can. I planned to throw it away after I finished cleaning the mess it had left behind. Suddenly, a shot of adrenaline jolted through me. I grabbed the painting and rushed out of the room, setting it face down against the trash can. I planned to throw it away after I finished cleaning the mess it had left behind. Grabbing paper, towels, and carpet cleaner, I returned to my room, spraying down the red blotch and blotting it up with the towels. But no matter how much I soaked up, no matter how many towels I used, the stain never faded. I used half the roll with no difference in the mark, so I started to scrub. I forced strength into my hands as I worked the cleaner deeper into the carpet. The iron smell thickened in the air, clinging to my nostrils. Still, the red refused to disappear. Instead, it spread. Slowly at first, then faster. I gritted my teeth, replacing each crimson-soaked towel with a fresh one. But no matter how many I used, the red only grew, seeping further into the fibers, infecting the floor like rot. Desperation gripped me. I yanked off the lid to the cleaner and poured the entire bottle over the stain, hoping it would break down whatever this was. But the liquid only carried the red further, diluting it into something worse. A rage boiled inside me. I grabbed the now empty container and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a loud bang. I stormed back to the painting, flipping it over, my lungs seized, refusing to pull in more air. The face had twisted in agony, mouth locked in an eternal scream. Rotting gums barely clung to jagged teeth, its rage a perfect reflection of my own. My breath quickened. My fists clenched. Was it mocking me? Mocking my misery? My anger, my pain? I didn't care. I just wanted it gone. In one motion, I swung my arm back and punched straight through the canvas. The fabric tore apart easily like it had been rotten. But it wasn't enough. I ripped the shredded pieces from the frame, tearing them into scraps, cursing through clenched teeth. "Fuck you!" I screamed as more obscenities spilled from my lips, my voice raw with frustration. When the frame was bare, I pried the wooden pieces apart, snapping them one by one in my hands and then breaking them over my knee. By the time I was finished, nothing was left but a pile of broken wood and torn canvas in the trash can. Still seething, I tied up the garbage bag, nearly sprinted out of my apartment, and tossed it into the dumpster. Then, finally, I took a deep breath. The winter air bit at my skin, sharp and unforgiving, but I welcomed it. Freedom. The word echoed in my mind, crisp and absolute. For the first time in days, I felt in control again. No more stench. No more visions. No more mask. I was sane again. And yet, beneath that relief, a hollow ache settled in my chest. My art had always been a source of joy, of pride. But this time, it felt different. This time it had taken something from me. Drained, I turned toward my apartment, craving nothing but sleep. But the moment I stepped inside, I froze. The iron scent was stronger than ever. The closer I got to my bedroom, the stronger the smell grew. My stomach churned with unease. Slowly, I walked toward the door. With each step, the scent intensified. I already knew what I would find. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. I opened the door, and there it was. The entire carpet had turned dark red. Streaks of crimson climbed upward, pooling in the corners like something living. The ceiling cracked. From the fractures, a dark, viscous liquid dripped onto the floor. Then, my gaze landed on the wall. The painting hung there, pieced shoddily, back together. The canvas was now uneven and seared back together. The mask's eyes were partially closed, with dark circles beneath them. It looked exhausted, just like me. My heart pounded against my ribs. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay here. So I did the only thing that made sense. I shut the door, I grabbed my keys, and I tried to leave. But when I reached the front door, it wouldn't open no matter how hard I pulled on it. Over and over I tugged on it, but it stayed latched shut. The liquid had hardened on its hinges, trapping me inside. I didn't give up, though. I continued to pull, and I pushed off the wall with one leg to give me extra leverage. Suddenly, the ceiling started to crack above me, allowing long strings of dark red to cover my face and body. Eventually, with enough effort, the door flew open, sending me flying back and landing on the sticky floor. I wouldn't let this chance go to waste, rose from the floor and darted outside my apartment until I made it to my car. I quickly jumped in, and as I drove, air became lodged in my throat. My chest felt tight, the weight of everything crashing down on me. One hand gripped the wheel, the other pressed against my sternum, trying to steady myself. I tried to rationalize what I had seen. What the hell was going on? Was I hallucinating from the stress? Had I just imagined it all? Why was there nothing on my clothes? Hadn't I just been covered in red? None of it made sense. I swallowed hard, forcing my mind to focus. I needed help. I pulled over to the side of the road, and with shaky fingers I grabbed my phone and dialed the only person I could trust. It rang a few times before a familiar voice picked up. "Hey Theo, are you doing all right? We haven't talked since the funeral. Did you get that little care package I sent you with all the snacks and stuff?" Ben. His voice was warm, grounding. It almost made me lose it completely. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah, I got it, thanks, man. I hesitated, gripping the phone tighter. "Ben, I need your help. I don't think I'm doing well, so I've been seeing things. Some crazy shit is going on in my apartment." I was met with silence, then cautiously. "What do you mean?" I ran a shaky hand through my hair. "I don't know how to explain it. It started after I painted something. Now it's like it's alive. It keeps changing when I leave the room, and I exhaled sharply. "I just need to stay somewhere else tonight. I need to know I'm not going insane." There was another pause, longer this time. When Ben spoke again, his voice was uncertain. "Theo, man, are you sure you're not just seeing things? I mean, you've been under a lot of stress. When was the last time you ate? Or slept?" I knew he'd say something like that. Hell, I had been trying to convince myself that it was just the stress as well. But the thought of that thing in my apartment waiting for me made my stomach twist. "Ben, I know how it sounds, but I swear, I saw it change. I saw it bleeding. It's like it's mocking me." My voice cracked. "Please, I just need to be somewhere else." Ben let out a shaky breath. When he spoke again, there was only concern. "All right, come over. I'll set up the couch. Just drive safe, okay?" The tightness in my chest loosened just a little. "Thanks, Ben. I'll be there soon." I hung up before my voice could crack. I didn't want to be alone any longer than I had to be, so I got back on the road. For the first time all night, I felt some sense of peace. No painting, no bleeding carpets, no walls shifting when I wasn't looking. Just the open road and the steady hum of my car beneath me. Then I smelled it. Faint at first, barely noticeable. Iron, the hairs on the back of my neck rose. I pressed down on the gas. The scent grew stronger, more pungent. It clung to the inside of my nose, thick and suffocating. I rolled down the windows, blasted the AC, but it lingered. I clenched my jaw and focused on the road. Just a few more minutes. Just a little further. I was going to make it. Then I glanced. Up at my front mirror, and the reflection wasn't just me. I was wearing the mask. The porcelain white clung to my face with a phantom weight. Its cheeks stretched taut in a grotesque grin. My lips didn't move, but the smile widened, too wide, splitting open to reveal rows of yellowed, uneven teeth. Soft, breathy laughter bubbled from my reflection. It grew louder, shrill, uncontrollable. It was laughing at me, its voice thick with joy, feeding off my fear. A sick wave of disgust crawled through me. My hands clenched. I struck the mirror with a balled fist. Glass exploded outward, splintering my reflection into 100 broken shards. The mask was gone. Just my own face stared back at me, fragmented, but normal. Pain throbbed in my hand, a red mark blooming across my knuckles, but I barely felt it. I had to move. Safety was just around the corner. When I finally pulled into Ben's driveway, I sprinted for my car. I banged on his door until he answered. Before he could say anything, I blurted out, "Ben, something's wrong with me. Ever since the funeral. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if it's the grief, but I made this painting and it's starting to scare the shit out of me. It keeps changing when I leave the room. It smells horrible. It tried to keep me from leaving." Ben stared at me, his face tight. With concern, I must have looked insane. Hell, I felt insane. He then saw the blood slowly dripping from the tips of my knuckles, his voice filled with a slight panic. "What the hell happened to your hand? Why are you bleeding?" I quickly wiped away the blood with my other hand, but it continued to rise. From the cuts, I saw something in my mirror. As the words left my mouth, I continued to recognize how unhinged I must have sounded to him. He stared at me in disbelief for a few seconds and stepped back slightly out of instinct. "Theo, have you been taking your medication? I know you've been having a hard time and it might have slipped your mind, but..." "Yes, I'm taking my damn medicine," I said, cutting him off in anger. "I'm telling you that I'm in real danger and I just need you to please help me." Reluctantly, Ben opened the door to let me inside. He had been there for me ever since high school, and I've always been grateful for it. In a consoling tone, he spoke, "Hey, it's going to be okay, man. You can stay the night here, get some rest, and I'm going to get you some bandages. We can go back to your apartment together tomorrow to make sure it's safe for you, all right?" I nodded, allowing him to guide me into his house and tend to my wound. After it was cleaned, I sat across the couch across from him. Just having another person nearby, a layer of defense against whatever was happening, made me feel safer. Ben sat down across from me, watching me carefully. "Theo, can you tell me more about what you've been seeing?" Without hesitating, I ended up telling him everything. He listened intently, his brow furrowed in concern as I recounted every detail. The paint that wouldn't dry, the iron smell that clung to me no matter where I went, the painting's return after I had destroyed it. He didn't interrupt, just let me spill it all out, the words tumbling over each other like they'd been waiting for release. When I finally finished, I slumped back against the couch, feeling as if I'd just run a marathon. Ben sat in silence for a long moment, rubbing his hands together. "Holy shit, that's a lot to take in." He let out a slow breath. "Are you feeling okay now? Are you still seeing things or anything like that?" I shook my head. "No. I'm okay now. I don't think the painting can mess with me now that I'm this far away from it." I tried convincing myself with my own words. "That's good to hear. Let's just take things easy for the night." He stood up, stretching. "I'll sleep out here with you tonight to make sure everything's okay. Let me set up the chair and we can play some games or something." I gave him a quiet thanks as he disappeared down the hallway. Even though I could tell he didn't fully believe me, I still felt relieved just having someone else nearby. This newfound safety helped me feel detached from the painting's influence. I had control over myself, control over my body and soul once again for the first time in what felt like days. When he returned, we spent the night talking about nothing, and played COD until we were tuckered out. He was the first to fall asleep on the recliner, and I slowly passed out on his couch. While I slept, I had a dream. The smell of antiseptics and sickness traveled throughout the air with dim lights bringing just enough visibility to my surroundings. I quickly realized I was in the hospital my mother was held in before she passed. Walking through the dark halls, I noticed a doorway in the distance glowing brightly. Entering the room, I was met with a familiar face. I slowly approached her bedside and sat on the edge of it. Despite the cruel situation, despite knowing she would die, my mother wore a smile. She had an easel at her bedside and was painting, patiently. It depicted a stunning flower-filled field with mountains far in the distance. It was peaceful, a reflection of who she was at heart, and it reminded me of how much I missed her. Watching her left me with a burning nostalgia and comfort I had quickly forgotten after her passing. After a short while, she sat down her brush and turned to face me while scooping my hands into hers. She spoke with a soft smile. "Theo, it's going to be okay. Please don't worry yourself anymore. I'm exactly where I need to be." Her words were sharp yet comforting at the same time, like a needle in your arm injecting medication. All I could do was nod and give a brave smile. I allowed her to pull me into a deep hug, and I prayed that this dream could last a little longer. Her warmth healed and sheltered me from my sorrow. Yet as I held her, she started to lose her firmness. Her arms sagged across my shoulders, and her breathing slowed. My heart dropped in response. It was happening all over again. I slowly laid her back on the bed and watched tearfully as she started to fall apart. Her body grew wrinkles, her breath became labored, and still she gave me a reassuring smile that told me not to worry. Within seconds, she was nothing before me, as if she never existed in the first place. All that was left was a red mark where her body once laid. Then the mark grew, consuming the bed. I quickly stood up and knew what was going to happen next. The red overtook the bed within seconds. Leaking from the mattress, it soon took over the floor. I ran out of the room, but it followed close behind. A tidal wave of crimson crashed itself through the hospital halls, the smell of iron close behind. I ran as fast as I could, but the blood outpaced me. It got closer and closer until it overcame me. The strength of the wave pushed me into the ground, and it surrounded me, forcing itself up my nose and down my throat. It pulled me deeper and deeper into the dark until I couldn't see anything. The blackness was heavy and endless, leaving my senses useless. All that was left was me in the deep dark void. For a moment it was calm. I closed my eyes and welcomed the silence of space. It was a brief respite from what I just experienced. Then I heard the laughter. Opening my eyes, I was welcomed to the mask only a few feet away from my face. It carried that same haunting smile as it did before, laughing at me. But it wasn't just laughing. It was using my mother's voice. It was a gross approximation, with a mix of gurgles and strain, but I could tell without a doubt that it was my mom's laugh. Taunting me wasn't enough. It was actively trying to torture me, break me down, and enjoy the process. I couldn't stop myself from giving in. I screamed as loud as I could, allowing my voice to overlap the screeching laughter that surrounded me. "What do you want from me? What do you want?" Suddenly, the laughter stopped. The only thing between the mask and me was silence. Then, without warning, it turned around and launched itself at me. It stuck to my face and started fusing. With it, I could feel my skin burn as the material of the mask melted into my face. I didn't want to lose myself to the mask, so I scratched at my face, tearing off skin and the mask all at once. I gouged out enough of a dent between my mask and face to shove my fingers in between the two. With as much might as I could force, I slowly tore the mask from my face, allowing it to take my skin and muscle. Then with one last yank, I ripped it away. I awoke in the dark of Ben's living room, panting and horrified. I quickly rubbed my hand over my face and felt the unkempt stubble on my chin. I was okay. There was no mask, there was no pain, and everything was okay. I took a moment to calm myself and knew what I had to do. I was going to purify the painting by burning it until not even ash was left behind. I silently gathered my things and slipped out of Ben's house unnoticed, letting him sleep peacefully on his chair. I didn't want to put him in danger with my presence. If everything went to plan, then we could laugh about how I went a little crazy after my mom's funeral. On my way back to my apartment, I stopped by the gas station. I made sure to fill up the gas can I kept in the trunk of my car, and I bought a box of matches. The drive home was oddly silent, like the calm before a raging storm. My hand pounded as it tensed around the steering wheel. Glass sat on the floor of my car as a reminder of what happened the day prior. I was set in my resolve, and I think that the painting knew it. Pulling in and walking inside, I was met with the mundane. My apartment was completely normal. The past experiences I had there never actually happened. At least, that's what I believed. When I walked into my room, sitting On the wall once again was the painting. It was still jagged and broken, stretched unevenly over the wooden frame. The mask now held a melancholic look. It was wearing a large, downtrodden frown as if disappointed. I didn't give a damn. I walked over to it and lifted it off the wall. When I did, strings of sinew tore apart, leaving behind a disgusting, fleshy shape behind. Looking at the back of the painting, I could see that the paper was starting to turn into something else entirely. I rubbed my finger along it and shuddered. It was flesh. It was a gross amalgamation of skin, blood, and hair, as if it used the material to repair itself. I gagged and held it with the tip of my fingers. Then, after a closer look, I saw that the painting started to expand and contract methodically. It looked as if it was almost trying to breathe. I held myself back from cracking it in half over my leg right then and there. I didn't want a chance at retaliating or end up losing a piece of it. I was going to burn it completely, return it to dust. Bringing it out of my apartment was easier than I expected. It didn't fight me. It didn't have my strength anymore. It simply kept breathing in and out with a soft wheeze. I ignored the labored breath, threw it in the back of my car, and started to drive. As I drove, the breathing grew louder from the painting. The mask's mouth started to move with each exhale. The teeth started to become more three-dimensional and shone in the streetlights. It continued to form and morph itself. By the time we made it to the destination, it even started to blink. I grabbed the writhing mass of flesh and canvas alongside the matches and gasoline. I walked solemnly. I knew exactly where to go, as I was there just